This week on the Orange Box podcast, we talk about PlayStation's PC and remaster strategies, possible leaks regarding the PlayStation 6, a handful of rumored Switch 2 games incoming, and more. All of this tonight, but first, on to that beautiful bean intro. Welcome to the place where PC and console gaming talk combine. This is the Orange Box Podcast, episode 68. I am your host, the man who has a remastered version of his 2020 self and would totally take your $70 to remaster himself again, Nathan, also known as the Frozen Gamer 87. And joining me, as always, the man who will be the next of Sony's live service games to be canceled, Justin, better known as I'm Zaracon. How you doing today? How's your week been?
It's been pretty good. Well, I should say, the bad out of the way. So, sometime earlier last week, I got an email from Amazon, and they canceled my Metroid Prime 4 pre-order, which I had since, I don't know, several years
2017
ago.
probably.
Yeah, like something like that. I was just wondering, why'd they cancel that now? I guess eventually I'll have to find another pre-order to make, because unless there's a special edition that could be coming out, which I hope. But other than that, though, I'll see what happens with that. But as I mentioned last week, I had Monday off because of Martin Luther King Day. I also took Tuesday and Wednesday, which is today, off as well. So had a pretty good break since Friday. So spent some time doing gaming, which I'll mention in a while. So I had been getting back to building Gundams and haven't done that in a while. I'm taking a partial break just because having to deal with some of the stickers was an issue, since those things are less than 1/10 the size of a penny, and trying to peel them off and put them on the models is annoying. So putting that on the back burner. But on a somewhat easier note, I bought my nephew a Pikachu model, and so while he and my niece were over here earlier this week, we built that together, and he enjoyed that. I had to help him out most of it, because cutting out the pieces and then also just trying to read the instructions was too much for him, so helped him with that. But he definitely enjoyed that, and he was telling my sister, saying, I made a Pikachu. So that was nice. But and then I guess to end things for my break, earlier today I went to the library for the first time in a long while. Didn't get too much, but I got some books and a couple movies, so that should sort of tie me over for a while until the next time I happen to go. But yeah, not a bad week.
Good stuff. Well, before I mention anything else, I need to point out something that I completely missed mentioning last week because of all the craziness, and I feel bad for forgetting to mention it. Not because I actually forgot about the event, but more just because at the time that we were talking about stuff, I had so many other things on my mind. But last Wednesday was my daughter's birthday, so we celebrated her birthday earlier that day. It's just that we also had a bunch of other things. It was just a very busy day. And then, of course, prepping for the podcast and watching out for the Switch 2 info, when we were still waiting for something. And then the various other things I had going on. Oh, yeah, the trip to Kansas City, which we did on Thursday. So we had the trip to Kansas City on Thursday, and then of course you and I recorded our reaction to the whole Switch 2 reveal, and I had to finish editing the podcast after that. In fact, actually, now that I think about it, I didn't actually get to editing the podcast until then, I believe. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Point is that there was that stuff. I'm trying to think. I know that there was nothing else big like my daughter's birthday over the past weekend, but I did do some stuff with my kids, and some of that I'll get into when I'm talking about games I've been playing. But yeah, I can't think of anything else. I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting. I just know it's nothing as important as my daughter's birthday. But this Sunday we're leading music at church again, since the guy who is normally scheduled for this week is going to be gone. So it'll just be us, and one of the other guys is gonna play with us. I'm pretty sure that's all it's gonna be. We might have 2 people playing with us, but I'm not sure yet. Either way, it's no big deal. We've done it enough times to where it's not difficult to pull off. So let's see here. I feel like there's something else I'm forgetting. Oh, I did get the Persona 5 Strikers comparison fully done. Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so Saturday, of course, is normally my day when I just try to get stuff done, and my goal was to get at least some work done on the comparison, because I wasn't expecting to necessarily finish it unless I just focused on that. But there was various other projects I had, like cleaning up my hard drive a bit, or hard drives, clearing out some space, and I can't remember what other projects were. There were just a few random things I needed to do, so I just kind of got various little projects taken care of, and then worked on that comparison and got almost completely... Actually, I got everything done on it on Saturday except for... Well, on the video side, I had gotten everything done. It was just the audio side that I had to finish. I had to cut up the audio and fix the graphics that indicate which source the audio is coming from and things like that. So it wasn't overly complicated, but I did that on Monday since I also had Monday off. And got plenty of time for gaming in. So that was good too. But yeah, busy week, but still got some gaming in, which was good, and all that.
Very nice.
But yeah. Oh, one thing. I thought about bringing this up in my recommendations later, but I'll just bring it up now because it's on my mind. A couple weeks ago, I had said for my recommendation about putting grapefruit juice in with like mineral water to basically make your own grapefruit soda. The one thing I didn't clarify when I said that, I wasn't talking about like doing like the bottled stuff from concentrate. I was talking about actually squeezing the juice from a grapefruit, and I also have the pulp in it, so then you still get the fiber and everything that you would normally get from eating the actual fruit, while at the same time not adding extra sugar and all this other stuff. So not that it's a huge deal, but I just wanted to clarify on that it was at least more healthy than an actual soda, even though it's not healthy per se, but mineral water has some stuff in it that's good, and you get the fiber from the grapefruit and also grapefruit juice. But surprisingly, one thing that I realized after doing that is that the color of like grapefruit soda, where it's like that cloudy color, that's actually the color that it is when you put real grapefruit juice in there. Interestingly enough, even though the meat of the grapefruit is pink. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, what have you been playing this past week, especially since you've had these extra days off?
Yeah, so this one I'll just get out of the way. While my niece and nephew were over, they wanted to play some more Stardew Valley, so we did some time with that. And one part, my niece, she wanted to make friends with the other townsfolk, but I told her, you have to talk to people and you have to give them gifts, and she said, okay, I'll just give them whatever I have. I said, no, you have to give them stuff they want, something like, otherwise they won't be too fond of you handing them tree sap, for example. So did some of that while they were here, but I played some more Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, and haven't made too much progress. I did can't remember what the world technically is called, but the spaceship level when you're with Stitch with Ven, and took care of that, and then I started Neverland. Haven't gotten too far in that, but just went around, did some exploring and whatnot with that, and also I tried to do some arena stuff as well, but there's one boss who has been giving me a bit of a hard time, and I don't know. I feel like part of it is because for some reason I think there's something that Terra could do that Ven can't, and so because
Mm,
of that, it's harder for me to actually consistently attack this boss
gotcha.
because he's just more difficult. And he's more he's able to do more counterattacks than other bosses, so that's what makes him difficult to deal with. But the meat and potatoes of everything that I've been playing though has been some more Final Fantasy VII Remake. And first thing I'll actually say is I went back this week and tried playing it on, well, with the classic controls, and
Hmm.
shortly after that I said no, this isn't going to work
Yeah.
at all. And the worst time actually was because I was fighting um the enemies with the shields, and unfortunately because of the fact that Cloud automatically attacks,
Hmm.
he's attacking them with shields, and it
Yeah.
just attacks are bouncing right off, and they're just counterattacking me. And I thought, yeah, as soon as this fight is over, I'm switching back because this is just bad. But
Yeah.
I've made more progress than I probably thought I would. I've gotten up to chapter 8, where you meet back with Aerith again. And really it's actually just right after the fight with Reno. That's as far as I've gone so far.
Nice.
And I will say that I'm definitely enjoying it, and from a story the story perspective, I do like the fact that they have expanded and fleshed out elements of the original story, especially with other
Hmm.
characters. Like, for example, you know, the other rebels like Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Biggs and Wedge didn't they die during the initial mission in the original game?
No, it was during when the plate collapsed.
Okay, okay, yeah, okay. So yeah, I definitely got that wrong, but I definitely did appreciate them about how Cloud's relationships with all of them, sort of building up, and even just doing some of the smaller side quests. I've sort of enjoyed those for what they were. They also helped me out too with really getting a grasp on the controls, because it's still, I would say that I'm not actually where I probably should be, but I do have a better understanding of how the gameplay works, especially with combat, and I'm not accidentally switching to another character when I mean to actually
Hmm.
use my abilities, which I've been trying to pay more attention to swapping out stuff like materia, and
Hmm.
also trying to enhance the weapons of my party, and trying to just be as efficient as I can be. And partially because of the fact that I know that when it comes to playing again on hard mode, I'm going to actually need to be on my A game, and also
Hmm.
know how to uh, utilize or try to survive without relying on items, since, as you pointed out, I cannot use them in
Yeah.
hard mode. So trying to use certain abilities, for example, Tifa's chakra ability to cure herself,
Hmm.
and then also other abilities as well. In addition, of course, to using magic cure. Um, Now I'm still I'm still not convinced that I like the change as far as the whole, as you put it, continuation from Advent Children.
Hmm.
I mean, sure, there's still more to the story that I have to go through, but the fact that the story keeps stopping because there are these spectral creatures that are
Right.
popping up all around, and I'm like, I don't know. I feel like this is really manipulating part of events, and I'm just like, Nomura. I'm not certain if I can get behind this, but I feel like as far as the core story goes and how they flesh stuff out, I like it.
Hmm.
I'm trying to partially play the game blindly, but at the same time, I'm kind of having just a small achievement guide set up so that way in each chapter, if it's like, hey, you can get these certain achievements in this chapter, I just gonna go ahead and get them, or at least for some stuff like trying to get stuff like the music CDs, make sure like I don't miss any of those in a chapter,
Yeah.
or if there are any other certain like items like that which I could miss and not and have to like look for that all over again later on in a new gameplay, then I'll have that set up so that way it sort of like helps me in that end. But I am trying to overall though go through the game pretty blindly in that aspect. But yeah, overall I'm still enjoying the game. I now actually one thing I do also want to add is I originally was going to try streaming the game to my Steam Deck, just because I didn't feel like just sitting at my desk and playing the game.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't know if it's a matter of the connection not being good enough because my PC is on the opposite end of the house from where my router is.
Yeah.
And the fact that also, it's not hooked up via Ethernet. I don't know if that's a partial reason, but
Probably.
the connection just was not good enough that I was not satisfied with it at all.
Yeah.
So I feel like because of the video you sent me about, how to get it running on Steam Deck at 60 FPS, I might go ahead and try setting it up that way because I would like to not have to always be at my desk to play the game, but at the same time, I wasn't certain if I would want to play it at subs or like at I sub 50 would not be optimal for me at all. So, seeing how you sent me that guide for how to get it to run pretty well, then I thought I might give it a shot. Initially, I thought downloading a 100 GB game onto my Steam Deck, I'm not certain how I feel about that, but I feel like at this point, I might as well, since streaming is out of the option right now. But yeah, that's everything that I have.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at that guide closely in a long time. I'm pretty sure it might now have something about making it run better on Steam Deck. I just know that it was basically to make it so that when you're in Sector 7 town and stuff like that, and Sector 5 and various places like that, where usually it has the most issue with just major stuttering and everything, that fix makes it so that it doesn't have that issue on PC. I'm not sure about Steam Deck because at least at the time when I played it, it didn't have any Steam Deck stuff there. So if it's very possible it has that now, and I haven't looked at it closely in a long time. I just made sure I pulled up the guide that gave me the information I needed in order to get it running well on PC. But yeah, okay. I mean, with the sub 60 FPS or even sub 50, for me the main thing has been like I've played the game, like I tried playing games at 30, and then once I bumped it up to 40, it was a noticeable difference because it feels significantly better than 30. It's still not perfect by any stretch. Obviously 60 or better is always preferred, but even then, I mean, it's still a big difference, especially being able to play a game like this on a portable device. So, but yeah, I mean, if you can't do it, you can't do it. Whenever I stream from my PC, my PC is hardwired into the router, even though the router's in a different part of the house. Or, well, it's like probably 25 feet. My PC is from the router. And thus my bed is also, roughly about the same distance because it's just pretty much right next to where I'm standing right now. So for me, most of the time streaming works great, but I also have gigabit internet, so that makes a difference. But yeah, good stuff. I'm glad you're enjoying it. The story stuff, I mean, really for me, I kind of see it as, I'm not sure how much I'm like into the Nomura style story, but I'm not bothered by the stuff that he did, because if it is in fact like a post Advent Children thing, and like basically Sephiroth when he said, "I will never become a memory," that he like transferred himself back in time through the life stream or whatever, which is the theory. Who knows if it's accurate? And of course, obviously, I haven't played Rebirth yet to know if any of that stuff comes up. But to me, that's kind of like, okay, it's more, I'm way more accepting of that idea than I am of the idea that this is completely erasing the original story. Because this way, at least, the original story hasn't disappeared. It's basically just Sephiroth trying to make it disappear. And they've already said in previous interviews that it's still going to end the same way. The overall trilogy is going to end the same way as the original. So presumably, regardless of everything that Sephiroth is trying to do by changing things, everything's still going to end the same way as it originally did. Like, he's not going to succeed. So, but yeah, the specters are just like really kind of thing. And I won't tell you what exactly it is, but there is a fight right near the end of the game that's really going to make you be like, yep, this is definitely made by Nomura. And that's all I'm going to say about it. But yeah, great game. I really love the game. Story being imperfect aside, and the stuff that came up after the ending of the game definitely makes me just curious, okay, what exactly is going on? Even though I still think that the original story is superior. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that front. And I'm still waiting for my Rebirth code to be available, because as of right now, it has not been made available. But that happens sometimes with Green Man Gaming. They don't get the code until like the day of at times. And so I haven't had a chance to preload, which is annoying. But that probably just means that I'm not going to be able to touch the game until sometime tomorrow at best. We'll kind of see how it goes, because I have to obviously edit the podcast tomorrow evening when I get home from work. And since I'm working at the office tomorrow, I'm not going to have the option to load anything up even once I get everything ready. Though I might be able to at least do a remote install for the desktop version, so that if I can get through the editing quickly enough, I should theoretically be able to at least play a little bit, but we'll see how things go. So, but as far as what I've been playing, there's really 2.5 games, I guess you could say. That's the extent of what it is. So, I continued playing Ocarina of Time on 3DS, and I finished it this evening. That is not getting every heart piece or every gold Skulltula. I still have a handful of both to get, but I did get all of the Great Fairy upgrades and got bigger on sword, and obviously did all the temples and then just beat Ganon. So there's all that stuff. And then, of course, I played some more Death Stranding. And with Death Stranding, I looked closer at some of the achievements, and I realized that being able to actually get all the achievements before Rebirth drops is not happening. I am close to having, I think I got 1 or 2 more achievements, and then I'm close to having a couple more. But the big thing is those premium deliveries I talked about. So I looked at it, I kind of misunderstood what it was saying. There's different categories you have for the types of deliveries. Like there's one based on the amount of cargo you're carrying, or the amount of cargo you deliver. There's one based on the amount of time it takes you. Another that's based on the condition of the cargo, and then there's 2 more. I can't remember offhand what those other categories are. But anyway, that being said, there's one achievement, which is the one I was thinking of initially, where you have to complete 10 premium deliveries with the S rank on hard or very hard, and you have to do it in each of those 5 categories, or maybe it's 4 categories. I guess maybe it is 4 categories. I'm thinking maybe the 5th one is actually like an extra. I mean, it's just like overall thing or something. But anyway, so you have to initially do that. You have to do 10 S rank premium deliveries in these 4 categories, which comes out to a total of 40. And it's not just 40 premium deliveries, period. It has to be 10 for each category. So then on top of that, you also have to get 20 for each category for a different achievement. So it's not like 30 total of each, it's still 20 of each. So when you work towards the greater achievement and you get the smaller one. But it is still just, I'm a long way from that. And so it's going to take a while for me to get all of that. I still think it's absolutely doable. There's no missable achievements in the game. But I think now I'm down to 7 or 8 total that I have left. And I think that's excluding the one that I get for getting all achievements. So, most likely, I'll probably play some tomorrow during my lunch break at work. And then otherwise, I won't really be playing much, if at all, unless I'm just in the mood to play in the midst of playing Rebirth, because obviously once Rebirth drops, I'm going to be playing that a bunch, and it is technically Steam Deck verified. The performance is not good, but it is playable because it's mostly 30 frames per second, which, less than ideal. Obviously not what I would prefer, but if it's just when I'm away from home, I'm okay with that. I mean, I played Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart almost exclusively on the Steam Deck because I didn't have a choice since I was away from home, and so I didn't have a computer capable of playing it. All I had was the Steam Deck, and so I was mostly playing it at 30 frames per second. And, with some dips here and there. So it's like, well, I'm not going to be playing it that way the bulk of the time, and probably most of the time if I'm playing it on the Steam Deck, it'll just be streaming from my PC. But I'm hoping to play it on my PC itself more of the time. And I think it should be one where I could probably get at least 90 frames per second, potentially 120, depending on what, if anything, I do with the settings, because it's a little hard to tell based on what the requirements are, because they're based, like, their ultra settings are based on doing it 4K, which obviously I'm not going to render it at 4K since I don't need to. I have a 1080p monitor. But, I'll play around with the settings and see what works best for me in terms of the ideal configuration. I did, and I don't have any footage of this, I did end up playing some Mario Kart 8 and Mario Kart 64 with the kids, which was pretty fun. I think I had more fun with Mario Kart 8, probably just because of the fact that it's a little more new player friendly, and my kid, I mean, it's more similar to Mario Kart 7, which is what they've been playing on their 2DSs. Whereas, Mario Kart 64 is, although it holds a lot of nostalgia for me, it is definitely much more dated. And so, I mean, it was fun. We had a good time. And that was really all we did. But that was the first time I actually played Mario Kart with all the kids. And so that was pretty cool. Pretty neat. But the last thing I played was just this evening, and I didn't play a lot. I basically just played the very earliest part of the game, and that is Ocarina of Time on PC. So I got the PC version running. It was actually pretty simple to do. I was even able to use my my N64 Switch controller. I ended up having to go into the buttons because a couple of them were not set correctly, but it was super easy to do that. And it actually was really easy to set up too. It was way easier than I thought it was going to be, because it seemed like it was probably going to be more complicated, but it was pretty simple. And so I got that set up, and running that game at 240 frames per second, and man, the game feels way different when you're running at a faster frame rate. It's crazy how much different it feels. I mean, like I went all the way through the Great Deku Tree, and just fought Goma, and then listened to the Deku Tree talk forever because it takes a long time to get through that dialogue, and there's no way to speed it up. I'm hoping there's some kind of mod that I can do to speed up dialogue in the future, because man, it's painful. I mean, like, it'd be one thing if I'd never played the game before, then I would be really interested, but I played this game a bunch of times, so like I know the story. I mean, I may not be able to recite what they say, but I know what the story is back and forth. And yeah, it's just, anyway, point is that when I went in and fought Goma, normally it's like 3 to 4 times through the cycle. You shoot her in the eye with the slingshot, and then attack her with your sword, and then she goes up, drops her eggs, you destroy the eggs, she comes back down, and rinse and repeat. Because of the higher frame rate, I was able to do it in two times through. And I imagine probably you could theoretically do that even with the lower frame rate, but usually I think having the higher frame rate made it much easier. And I mean, like, I wouldn't say necessarily the game was easier per se compared to what it is otherwise, but the fact that you can easily get more hits in definitely makes a difference. So yeah, it was pretty cool. The one thing I will say is I think with the PC version, I really want to look into different visual mods. I did notice that there's like some mods that are trying to basically just upres all the textures, because the way that this one's set up, it's basically only like the character models that have higher resolution, and the 3D environments, but like the textures themselves are still very low res, and I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it's noticeable sometimes. And like, I would be perfectly fine with just keeping the N64 aesthetic, but then at the same time upgrading especially like the pre-rendered backgrounds, because those are the most noticeable at how low resolution they are. Like, I'm back and forth on whether or not I would want to do the 3DS style character models and environments and everything, mostly because of the fact that while I do really love those, I also feel like, is it really necessary? All of this, I mean, I love the N64 aesthetic as well, and there's like a current one where someone, not only are they updating the textures in general, but they're just kind of trying to basically modernize without changing the style. So it's still a work in progress, and it'll be a while before the thing is fully done. I think it's like at 40%. So I don't know. I'm not really necessarily actually playing the PC version. I more just wanted to test it out because I had a little bit of extra time, and I figured, okay, well, at least see what's involved with this process. So there was that. And just literally extremely briefly, I didn't even actually boot up. Well, I booted up the game, but I didn't actually start it. And that is, I just briefly booted up Majora's Mask 3D, because I was like, I wouldn't mind playing Majora's Mask now that I finished Ocarina of Time. And that one I'm super torn on, because on the one hand, I love the original N64 version. And of course, obviously, since there's PC version, basically, that would certainly give some benefits. Obviously, number one thing being the fact that the frame rate is significantly better. But at the same time, the 3DS version adds one thing. I mean, it adds multiple quality of life improvements, but the number one thing that it adds that makes the biggest difference for me is having camera control and not just having to use the Z targeting for turning the camera. And that's the one thing that makes me think, man, I might have to just play it on 3DS. And of course, I love the 3D effect as well, but really the camera control is the number one thing that they added to the 3DS version that wasn't in the original. And if there's a mod to make it work, then I would be up for it. But it's also kind of cool playing the game with an N64 controller because just nostalgia. And the camera controls aren't like necessary at all times. Honestly, the number one time where I felt like the camera controls were the most helpful in the 3DS version was when rolling as a Goron, because then you could actually see where you were going to be going, like especially when you're trying to get to the snow temple and you're having to bounce off of the different things in order to jump across the gaps to get to inside the temple. And I think it also is used when you're on the moon, when you're doing the final dungeon quite a bit. But I don't know, I'm back and forth on that. And of course right now I'm not like, oh, I'm gonna play it right now, just more I'm going to probably get it installed and then go from there, decide whether or not I want to do anything further with it. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, obviously I'm looking forward to Rebirth tomorrow, and just keep checking to see when Green Man Gaming will have my code available so that I can redeem that and preload. But yeah, that is everything.
So question regarding the camera controls. You mentioned that was in Majora's Mask 3DS. Did they add that for Ocarina of Time as well, or was that just Majora's Mask only?
Majora's Mask only.
Huh, okay.
At least as far as I know. I've never actually tried, I don't think, to see if it works, but I know that it had camera controls from the very beginning, from when the game launched, which was the same day that the new 3DS launched.
Okay, that would make sense then. Yeah, that makes sense. Especially since with Ocarina of Time, that released when the first 3DS came out, and they didn't even have the right stick peripheral yet.
Yeah.
So that makes sense to why. But who knows? Maybe eventually someone could make a mod or like have that added in so you could have the camera control. But that's interesting to know. Yeah, I feel like since they sort of, I mean, it was just the textures they added for Ocarina of Time for the PC version. You know, maybe eventually they could get around to doing that for Majora's Mask as well with the camera control. But you said they were working on that. That was the 40% mod that was being worked on.
Yeah, just modernizing the textures is what's being worked on. So.
Okay, so not the controls.
No, not the controls.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't looked super in depth because I kind of just got a brief look at it, but I didn't see any control mods. There may very well be some, and if there are, then that would definitely be a game changer, literally. But yeah, I didn't notice anything. All I was seeing was basically just graphical mods.
Okay. And question, since I never completed this, so if you have done it, I would like to know what the actual reward you receive is for getting all the gold Skulltulas in the game.
What it is that the center gold Skulltula guy, you know, when the curse is broken on him, he gives you, I mean, you can basically come to him and get like a golden rupee whenever you want, and I want to say it's worth like 999 rupees. So it's relatively useless, to be honest, but it's more just, you know, the collector in me that wants to do that. And I thought about doing it, but because of the fact that I have beaten this game plenty of times, and I knew that like when I actually beat the game, I could still go back and do more if I wanted to, I just left it. And furthermore, I also know that the reward isn't really worth the time it takes to get, especially when I'm at the point where I'm, you know, ready to go into playing Rebirth.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with you about the beginning being a very slog experience just because of the fact that you can't skip anything. And I feel like sometimes in Zelda games it's like that. Like, for example, Twilight Princess, that felt kind of slow at the beginning too, but Ocarina of Time probably might have been the worst offender just because of the dialogue going on constantly. But yeah, I definitely would want to look into that as well, seeing if there is some sort of mod that can help you fast forward or skip those segments, because that probably would be the weakest part of the game, just because if you replay it, you have to go through all that again.
Yeah.
But yeah. So since you don't think it would be possible for you to do it, and because of the fact that Rebirth comes out tomorrow, do you think you would possibly, of course, as you said, in whatever time you felt like playing it, do you think you would be able to like finish, or like when do you think you could possibly get all the achievements for Death Stranding?
I think it's largely going to depend on whether or not I decide to hop into it at all in the midst of playing Rebirth, because I know Rebirth is longer than Remake. It's a longer game, has a lot more content, less padding, and also has more challenge to it, especially in terms of everything to get all the achievements. So it's honestly, it's really hard to say. The only thing at this point is basically I would like to get all the achievements before Death Stranding 2 drops, assuming that it comes to PC day one, which, you know, we'll wait and see whether or not that actually happens.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all the questions that I have then.
Sounds good. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then let's go ahead and get into the news. So one of the first things, this was a kind of funny thing that happened on the Kind of Funny podcast, which of course I do not watch because I can't stand Greg Miller. But anyway, getting back to the actual topic at hand. So Shuhei Yoshida, former president at Sony, was interviewed by Greg Miller of Kind of Funny Games, and one of the things that Yoshida said, amongst multiple other things, was that one of the main reasons why Sony has been so focused heavily on both remasters of their games and PC ports is because they need the extra money to fund their first-party titles. And basically was saying, if you want to see more first-party titles, you need to support these remasters. And of course, along with that, obviously, he was talking about PC ports, and that being one of the reasons why they do PC ports is to help fund these first-party games. So, of course, he'd never said anything about day and date, and he's no longer with Sony, so it doesn't really matter from that standpoint. But what are your thoughts about this as a whole?
Well, I think that's partially I feel like that's partially obvious as to why they're doing it. And I mean, I believe Sony at some point, or some representative from Sony has said that as far as the ports and remasters, a lot of them go toward, you know, funding new games, since, you know, it costs money. And obviously, as PC gamers, we have no problem with these ports coming over whatsoever.
Except for Last of Us Part 2, they can keep that garbage.
Yeah, they can definitely keep that one. I mean, if they want to get a refund on that, I feel like that's fine, perfectly fair. But as in general, though, these ports are definitely welcome for us. Also, you know, if they want to keep Spider-Man 2, they can do that as well. But I think, though, I will partially disagree with, even though it's part of the funding, I think that Sony goes a bit overboard with the remasters, partially with stuff like games that came out either the last gen or something that is still kind of relatively new, and they decide to remake or remaster something, and I think it's not necessarily necessary. And I mainly say that from a PlayStation perspective. Like, if they just ported over the games to PC, that's sort of one thing. But if you're going to sell the same game to PlayStation gamers all over again, that I kind of take issue with. Like, they did this with Horizon Zero Dawn. They did it with Last of Us Part 2. They've done this repeatedly, and I'm thinking on that end, why are you remastering these games that just came out? And I mean, technically, you could also, and at the same time, not doing the games that people probably want, like a certain From Software game that hasn't been done. I mean, I feel like on that end, I disagree with that method, but I also think that another thing that I'm not saying they should, necessarily do this because it might, interfere with PC ports, but maybe, and this also sort of applies to a lot of other companies, and we might get into that later on, but just lower your budgets. I mean, Sony wants to make all these huge, spectacular AAA cinematic games, but if it's that expensive to make, maybe you shouldn't make your budget that high that you're concerned about whether or not you can afford to foot the bill. So that, I think, is something that Sony and the industry as a whole has to do, is just reconsider, rebudget, their goals, go over everything, because if you have to, if it's absolutely necessary to make all these remasters and ports, which again, those ports are welcome, but if it's necessary to do all that stuff just to finance the next game, then you're spending way too much, and you need to cut down on that, because that's not a good idea. I mean, considering the fact that if an average consumer has to constantly ramp up their credit cards just to do stuff, then we have to look at all our finances and stuff and reorient things. Then a company like a major company should also have to do the same thing, instead of just trying to constantly shift stuff around and use remasters and ports as some sort of credit to finance their next game. That does not seem to make the most sense to me. But like I said, though, PC ports, though, hey, I'm all up for that. Keep doing that, Sony, and maybe this will eventually, of course, they've talked about this before, but eventually they might think, well, we really need to hurry up and try to do those Xbox and Switch ports as well to help us finance these games as well.
Yep.
But yeah, that's pretty much everything that I have to say on the matter.
Yeah, it's definitely a situation where of course, I thought it was, delicious. You could just see the pain on Greg Miller's face when Yoshida-san was saying these things, especially with as much as he rags on PC gamers. And it's like, I don't really care if you rag on PC gamers, other than the egregious accusations that he makes. That being said, this was obvious to anybody who was actually paying attention, that Sony was doing this to fund these games because their budgets are way overblown, because they keep going for that same cinematic HBO story level, playable HBO game is essentially what they're going for with these games. And like, I'm not gonna lie, I've said many times, I enjoy a lot of those games. Like, I really love the Infamous games. I have enjoyed Horizon, at least in terms of the gameplay. I don't care for Aloy, but I do like the gameplay of the Horizon games. The Infamous games, I think, are much less in that, because they're not as much cinematic, even though the last one was more cinematic than the others. The first two were more comic booky, because they used very comic book cutscenes and that sort of thing. But it's just a situation where, even though I enjoy a number of these games, I still think they need to get that variety back. They haven't had the variety in a long time, and the lack of variety is a big part of why it is that they're hurting right now. And I know, especially from talking to PlayStation fans and hearing what PlayStation fanboys have said, because I do separate the two, people look at, Xbox not selling a lot of consoles, and they don't see how Game Pass makes financial sense, even though they're bringing in consistent revenue rather than having just revenue spikes here and there. But Sony also is having all sorts of other issues with how they're having to cancel games, and they're shutting down a lot more studios. I mean, everybody's doing layoffs because they overhired during the pandemic, and then that the demand did not keep up with the supply, so they had to get rid of people. And this is just all across the board, so not condemning any one person on that standpoint or any one company. But the reality is that when it comes to what they're putting out, Sony seems to be having more issues. And not because their games aren't selling reasonably well. They're selling reasonably well. It's just that the cost of the games versus what they sell, there's a big gap there. And I truly believe that Day and Date is coming a lot sooner than anyone anticipated. It's going to be Day and Date on PC, and it could very well be one of their next big games. We could see Ghost of Yotei as as the first game to make a Day and Date to PC. Maybe I'm wrong on that. And really, I kind of don't want it to be Day and Date because I would rather wait to find out for sure what the game is before I invest in it, because as much as I adore Sucker Punch, I'm also a little worried about how much of the actress's agenda and that sort of thing is going to infect the game itself versus it just being another solid story that they typically put out. So anyway, when it comes to the remasters, I agree. I think that it's not good that they're constantly milking their the people who buy these games, because the reality is that there are a lot of people, they buy these games regardless. Not everyone. I know plenty of PlayStation fans who do not buy all the remasters. Even with just the $10 upgrade fee, they haven't necessarily bought the Horizon remaster. Last of Us Part 2 and the remake of The Last of Us, which was really more of that was like a good remaster in terms of how much they improved the visuals, whereas Last of Us Part 2 was, you could hardly call it a remaster because they really didn't improve anything. They just added in a little bit of extra filler content and a half-baked roguelite mode. But I guess it's just, I see this as the writing has been on the wall for a while. This was going to happen. Day and Date is coming. And I know that PlayStation fans and especially fanboys are not happy about that. They're in denial. They don't believe it's going to happen. I think it's coming sooner than I think. And I think that Sony's going to start putting more games on Nintendo as well. Lego Horizon Adventures was a test. And of course, obviously it didn't do very well, but it didn't sell well on any of the platforms. It almost wouldn't surprise me if it actually sold better on Nintendo than it did on PlayStation. I doubt that's the case. More likely it sold the best on PlayStation, but it didn't sell well on PC. And even if it sold better on PlayStation than other platforms, it still didn't sell very well. And I think part of the problem with that, of course, besides when it came out, is the fact that I think people just don't like Aloy as a character. I mean, Sony is desperately trying to make Horizon games over and over. And while they're largely popular, they do sell pretty well. I think the problem is that people just aren't really into the character. Like, I hear from some people that they're interested in her as a character, but most people, they don't really have anything positive to say about Aloy, especially because she talks so much. And it just grates on people a lot. And for me, it kind of goes back and forth. Like, I don't think it's quite as bad, but I also don't listen to a lot of the dialogue trees. I just stopped after a while. Like, Zero Dawn, for a while there, I was listening to all the different dialogue trees, and then after a while, I was just like, there's just too much here, and I stopped even bothering with it. And with what I played of Forbidden West, it's been kind of back and forth on that. most of the time I'm just like, I don't want to take the time to listen to all these different dialogue things because it just gets so tedious. And it's just like, I want to just play the game because I like the rest of the gameplay. I like shooting the robots, and I like the collecting and the traversing. And of course, they made big improvements to the traversal in the game, you know, borrowing a lot of ideas from Breath of the Wild, and you know, greatly improving the game over what it was with the first game, even though the first game was pretty solid in terms of gameplay. But we just keep getting all these franchises that are just, it's just remastering the same things over and over. And I mean, I'm expecting there's going to be another Last of Us of some kind. In fact, I would guess probably after the Heretic, The Last Prophet, I think the name of the game is, the new Naughty Dog property. After that comes out, there's going to be a Last of Us Part 3. I'd say it's almost guaranteed. Naughty Dog is never going to do anything else again. Well, we could see an Uncharted 1 remake, but the Uncharted 1 remake would probably be done by somebody else. Funny thing is, you know, I'm thinking about it, and Uncharted, like the multiplayer for, especially for I think 2 and 3, people had a lot of positive things to say about those. Like they really liked the multiplayer, and that's something that would potentially work as a live service game, but you know they're not going to do that. And I mean, they already, the fact that they got rid of factions, the Last of Us factions that people really loved, just says all we need. And we'll get more into other canceled live service games, but I don't know. I know I'm all over the place with this, but to try to sum up my thoughts, I think that remastering games over and over, and Sony basically saying that if you want more games, you have to buy these remasters. I think that's stupid. I think the remaster should always just be optional, completely optional. And I mean, even though it technically is, they shouldn't require people buy remasters in order to be able to get new games. And the PC games are going to keep coming. PC ports, right now, I think the only actual PS5 exclusive game on, well, the only PS5 exclusive that is currently there, I mean, apart from third party or, you know, money-hatted games, is Demon Souls. And everything else that has come to PS5 is either on PC already or has been announced for PC. And I think right now it's just Spider-Man 2, and that's coming. That's coming next week, I think. So, yeah. And I mean, you know, obviously there's lots of back catalog from PS4, which there's a handful of games there, and then PS3 and you know, earlier, we don't have, I don't think we have any of those games yet. I mean, I guess technically a couple of the games we have were PS4s, but we have the remastered versions that came to PS5 that were ported over. I think Horizon Zero Dawn and Days Gone are the only two that were specifically PS4 games that came to PC. And then everything else was the PS5 version that was ported. Oh no, God of War 2018 was another one too.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's everything I have to say on that front.
Yeah, same here. Anything else will just bleed into other topics we'll be discussing.
Right. Well, speaking of, we have reports regarding some live service games that have been, some more live service games that have been canceled by Sony. Because originally we had that there was going to be 12 live service games. 6 of them got canceled. We don't know what all of those were. We discussed this a while back, but recently we got word that there's actually been even more live service games that have been canceled. And right now we know for sure, well, at least based on a Bloomberg report, and Jason Schreier is the person reporting it. He has a great track record. He's almost always, his information has been correct. the two live service projects that have been canceled were from Ben's studio, who did Days Gone, among other projects, and Blue Point has done like the Demon Souls remake and the Shadow of the Colossus remake and handful of other ports as well. And one of those we know was a live service God of War game. And then another one from a separate report is that apparently that live service Horizon game has been canceled. The third game, we don't really know what it was from Ben's studio. We just know Blue Point was God of War, the God of War live service game. And then, let's see here, which one was it that did they're supposed to be doing the Horizon one? That was NCSoft. So, yeah. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, one thing I'll just quickly add is that even though these projects were canceled, Sony has kept all the developers from the studios, from Bend, and from Blue Point as well. So they've just been transitioned over to other divisions. So it's not like they've been laid off or anything like that. Right. So they still work at Sony. It's just that they're no longer working on these projects. So that is the good news from this, is that no one just like lost their jobs because of this. But on the other hand, though, it is funny that, I feel like Sony is finally realizing that these live service titles, these live service ventures aren't as lucrative as they probably thought they were going to be. And I think especially I think Concord really shook them up because, I think partially after the success of Helldivers 2, even with the backlash of forcing PC gamers to have a PSN account and, effectively limiting all the countries that had access to the game or could have access to the game, I think even despite the backlash on that end, they still are pretty confident with how things were going to go with the live service market. But with Concord bombing as poorly as it did, that really made them reevaluate things. And so now they're just thinking, okay, maybe all these live service games they wanted to make aren't the best idea. And, so they've been canceling these other ones. And for one thing, though, I will say some of them I do not understand why they need to exist. Like, how would you even do a God of War live service game, like a multiplayer game? I mean, the game centers around Kratos as a single player, as a single character. He is the focal point. How do you turn that into a multiplayer live service game? That does not make sense to me at all. And so I feel like they were really just trying to take any IP they had, even if it didn't make sense, and just try to milk it as a live service thing. And again, I feel that is partially probably something they were trying to do as part of, well, these will help finance these other games that, we want to make and develop. But at the same time, though, why not put that dedication into something that people would want? As you said earlier, Factions was well beloved by PlayStation gamers, and yet they canceled that. And I mean, the funny thing is, of course, the fact that they were having Bungie advise the development of the game, and some stuff with Bungie wasn't necessarily the best as far as how they've handled Destiny. But that being said, they still were trying to get Factions for Last of Us Part 2, but that never came out. And as you said, people enjoyed the Uncharted multiplayer. They probably could have done something like that with as a live service title, but they didn't do it. And instead they focused on all these other things that either didn't make sense or won't work out. And I'm wondering, what are they thinking? Now, do I think that they're going to abandon live service altogether? I don't think so. I think that, again, because of Helldivers 2, they haven't given up completely. And even though they've canceled other projects, I still think that they probably might still want to have a couple in the deck, just because they might say, well, maybe here's something we could try our hand at. But at the same time, possibly because of the fact that they're canceling all these, what they perceived as continuous revenue streams, they'll say, okay, more remasters instead to make up for, people spending microtransactions and all this other stuff over a steady amount of time. Just say, all right, we're just dropping out remaster here, another remaster here, and probably about 5 or 6 months later, something like that, to make up for that. But I mean, I kind of agree. I feel like, I mean, for one thing, the live service market is heavily saturated, regardless of what company you are. I mean, it's really hard to carve out any sort of space for you, unless it's, I mean, it's definitely possible. I mean, if you look at what's the game that just came out, Marvel Rivals, that seems to be doing pretty well right now. But again, it's not something that would be really easy. You're really competing with a lot of heavy hitters who already have a large market share, like Fortnite. You have Apex Legends. You have all these other games. I guess you could say, I mean, this isn't really, I mean, maybe it counts as live service, but I mean, Overwatch. You have Rainbow Six Siege. All these games that, I mean, granted, some of them might not be as popular as they once were. They're still considered, I guess, the major live service multiplayer games. So trying to get in there is really difficult. And sure, Sony has the big brand, but they're not necessarily known for their live service games, their multiplayer, which is kind of ridiculous and sad because they did do a good job back in the day. They did have multiplayer games, but nowadays they're just known for their single player experiences. So it is hard to do that. So I think Sony reevaluating their strategy is wise, and I do think that I just think instead of doing live service, just focus on a good multiplayer addition to a single player experience, which I feel like is something that before we had the internet, before we have online gaming, that was something that was fun. You had single player games, but they also had good multiplayer additions. Like for example, one thing that's popular was GoldenEye 64. You had a campaign, but you also had multiplayer that was fun to play as well. You have you have all these other games that came out on the PS2, on GameCube, where you had a single player game, but you also had a multiplayer attached to that as well. So that way, anyone who wants to play, you want to play with friends, you can do that. Unfortunately, with the internet, we just have, all right, let's just have only multiplayer experiences, which I'm not saying is bad, but when you lose your focus and just focus on that particular aspect, it can definitely be a detriment to you. But we'll see what happens in the future. Like I said, I think Sony might not completely abandon live service games, but I think that it definitely will not be as heavy of a focus as they once wanted it to be. I think maybe at most they might have 3 or 4 titles in the future, unless they happen to cancel some of those. But yeah, that's everything I have.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say exactly what I think about all this. I definitely will say, first of all, like you said, God of War did not make any sense whatsoever as being a live service game. I mean, especially because they had Blue Point of all studios working on it. Like, why? I mean, what were they thinking? Obviously, they weren't thinking, but then you have this Horizon multiplayer game, which I think makes more sense, but still, it's trying to make Horizon more of a property, like make it more popular than it actually is. And I know that they're still like working on a lot of that, trying to make Horizon into a bigger thing, like doing a TV show, and I can't remember what else. And I mean, if they manage to make it work, okay, but obviously the live service, based on reports at least, has been canceled as well. And it just ends up continually being a question of what are they doing? I mean, this is Sony's first party studios working on these games that nobody asked for. Games that don't even make sense to make them as live service games when they have properties in their backlog. Previous franchises that they've used, like SOCOM and that sort of thing, that if they were to bring it back, they could actually make something that would be successful. They could have done Last of Us Factions again because people loved that multiplayer mode in the original game. I mean, I understand that, from the standpoint of trying to do a live service thing, they may have felt like there wasn't enough they could do to actually make it continuously popular. And I understand that, but at the same time, they still could have found ways to make it work well. I mean, we look at Helldivers 2 and the success of that, which is primarily propped up by PC, once again. Helldivers 2, they've been able to make that work really well, and it's had some low moments, of course, but overall, it's done extremely well. It's sold, I want to say, like 12 to 14 million copies, something like that, and more than half of those on PC. I mean, it's just been, it's been highly successful, and there is absolutely a way that they could have similar success with other games if they would just pick the right properties, but instead they're trying to take single player games and turn them into multiplayer games when they aren't multiplayer games. They just don't work for that. I just think Sony has lost its identity, and I know a lot of PlayStation fans especially think that Sony's identity is all based on its exclusives, and for the most part it essentially has been, but I still would argue that it shouldn't be their identity. Their identity needs to be more in making great games, and they can continue to make great games without making them exclusive. And if they would actually expand the types of games they would make instead of making basically the same types of games over and over with just very slight variations, then they would probably be able to do a lot more and be a lot more successful. And of course, once they get to a point that they start putting stuff day and date on other platforms, whether it's just PC or eventually Xbox or Switch, whatever, even though I think Xbox is going to be a lot longer before they do day and date on there, I think that will help them a lot. And because of just the way the market is now, you give people those choices, you're going to have more game sales, which is going to help a lot with covering the cost of these budgets. Now, of course, if they would just in the first place not inflate the budget so much, not focus so much on realism, and focus instead on just making good games, well, they probably would have a lot more success than they've been having. And they wouldn't just have, these revenue spikes here and there, but that don't even begin to cover the cost of development. Instead, they would actually be able to make a profit, and it not just be like, okay, well, we spent $400 million on Concord. It completely bombed. It was a complete waste of money. And now the game is just offline. It's gone. People who bought the game, even though they were able to get refunded, I mean, I can't imagine how much money they lost. Well, my guess is it was probably like 401 million because they didn't sell many copies of that game. So it's like, oh, the 400 million that they spent on development and the 1 million that they got in revenue from the copies sold would be my guess. But I don't know. I wish Sony would go back to, as Oh No, It's Alex has put it, being weird again. Doing all these different and unique games and just coming up with something that's special and that stands out, instead of it just being basically the same general type of game with a few slight variations. So I don't know if I have anything more to say on that topic.
Agreed.
All right, well, since we're already on the PlayStation topics, you want to talk about these supposed leaked PlayStation 6 specs?
Yeah, so there has been a leak that the PS6 design is already out, the specs leak. So it's going to be using, this is actually one of the key noted things here, is going to be using the 3D V cache, which is part of the AMD X3D. Now, I'm not the best at explaining what all of this means, but essentially it is just the way that the processors work is more efficient and stuff, and so it makes them better at gaming. And I think as far as with the at least with the X3D CPUs, the Ryzen CPUs, they're essentially pretty much dedicated primarily only for gaming. So like using them for any type of work, any sort of production work, isn't that great. It's actually a bit more of a detriment. But as far as with gaming goes, these things are pretty much ideal for gaming and dedicated for gaming. So if the PS6 has this, it can definitely be a big game changer with what it can do. And it's also using Zen 6, which is definitely, I think, I can't remember if the current, or at least what would be the current, if not upcoming, Ryzen chips are using Zen 6. Let me just quickly double check that. But if it is using Zen 6, then it definitely will be up to date. If not, well, actually, no. Let me see here. Using Zen. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm sorry. That Zen 6. Yeah. So Zen 6 actually is not part of that's actually the graphics. So that would be that would be pretty much next gen stuff, which is again something that would be pretty up to date on things. And let me see what else I have here as far as the specs go. Just pull this up here. Whoops. So I had the article up earlier. Let me see the architecture here, but I think those were the core steps, or stuff that wasn't too technical. But yeah, and then also like one last thing is the fact that it's speculated, or at least according to this leak, the PS6 would be coming out in 2028. So that would be about 3 years from now, give or take. But with that being said, though, what are your thoughts on all of this information?
Well, I watched that video that you sent me, and wow. I don't understand. Well, I shouldn't say I don't understand. I cannot believe that fanboys are so delusional to actually think that this is real. Now, the potential release of 2028, I say that's believable. But that's the only thing about this whole thing that's believable. It sounds like the majority of what they're saying here is stuff that either the technology does not exist and it's just theoretical, even if it does, even if it is something we know is coming, like it's confirmed it is coming along, them saying that, oh, it's going to have all this power. It is a fanboy's dream that it's going to be like this. But it's the same thing as the people who have been saying that the PS5 Pro or even the PS5 itself is equal to a 4090 or a 5090. It's like, you guys, you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. It's funny that video that you sent me, it's very clear that this is a PlayStation-focused, PlayStation fanboy channel. They were saying that, Mark Cerny said that the PS5 Pro has elements of RDNA 2, 3, and 4, and so it's basically RDNA 4. I mean, is what this person said. I'm like, that's not what Mark Cerny said. He said that it has elements of 2 and 3, and then he's calling it 2.x. He literally called it. I mean, this was in like a recent breakdown that he was talking about this and talking about the rumored teraflops being 3.7, and said that's not accurate at all. And that people were using as the term that he used was flopflation, where they're saying that something's way more powerful than it actually is. And it's just, when I hear stuff like this, them saying that it's going to have all these theoretical specs, it brings me back to not just, what happened with the PS5 and that sort of thing, but back to certain YouTube channels before the original Switch launched, or even after the Switch launched, who were saying that the Switch was going to be like this ultra powerful. I mean, that it wasn't going to be called the Switch at the time, because at the time they didn't think that it was going to be a hybrid. They thought it was just going to be a powerful home console, and they're talking about all these super specs that it's going to have and all this stuff. And it's like, there's a nail in the coffin, that this, for based on what Nintendo said, the nail in the coffin, that this hybrid theory is dead. It's not real. And then of course we actually saw the Switch and found out it was completely real, and they were completely wrong. And so then they start going into the Switch Pro mode of talking about things. Or before that, there was like, there was both the Switch Pro saying that, there's going to be this powerful Switch Pro, and they talked about it for years and years until it eventually got to the point where it's like, okay, I guess I can't talk about Switch Pro anymore because it's obviously not happening. And then, there was another, this particular channel I'm thinking of. I'm not going to call him out because if you know who he is, you know who he is, and I don't really feel like he deserves any hate. I felt like a lot of his stuff was very much reading into things, but he was saying at one point that that Sony was going to be doing a PSP3, and this was years ago. This was like probably it was either 2017 or 2018, and that they were going to announce it at Tokyo Game Show, like a September Tokyo Game Show is always in September, but that it was going to be like announced at like 3 a.m. or something. And he's talking about, it's going to have like this laptop chipset, this laptop graphics card and stuff like that. And I'm just like, I don't think you understand how these things work. I mean, I'm no expert, not by any stretch, but you can't put a laptop graphics card in a handheld device. It just doesn't work that way, especially not at the time. I mean, nowadays, technology is a lot further along. You potentially could do stuff like that, but in general, it's like, no, you can't do that. The power consumption would be too much, even if you could fit it in there and it wouldn't get super hot. Even if you managed to get the cooling right, the power consumption would be way too high. There's no way this would work in a handheld. And now I've seen this especially with first the PlayStation 5 Pro and now the PlayStation 6, where they're using all these either theoretical or confirmed future versions of RDNA, of Zen processors, all of that, and saying that the PS6 is going to have this stuff in it. It's going to have the current technology. And that does not happen. It never happens. Consoles never have current technology. Now, they may have it in some aspects. Like at the time that the PS5 launched, it had a better M2 processor than we had in PC. It didn't take long for PC to catch up from that standpoint, and it was already leagues ahead in every other area. But, when it comes to these supposed leaked specs, I always take them not just with a grain of salt, but with like a tub of salt, like a bag of salt. I use these bags of salt for my water softener, and it's like these are 40, 50-pound bags. I dump a bunch of those in, and it's basically like I would take the 10 bags of salt and consider them to be basically how much I trust these rumors, because I buy 10 bags of salt at a time. It's so delusional, and I think that people just need to have realistic expectations when it comes to consoles. By the time they are that powerful, they'll still be probably 5 to 10 years behind. Well, probably not 10 years, probably more like 5 years. But they're going to be really far behind. and they're always going to be behind. Consoles, I guess maybe there is a theoretical possibility in the future that consoles could catch up, but the reality is that as long as they're priced the way they are always going to be behind technology. They're not going to be using the latest stuff at all, and that's fine. They're at a lower price point. You still get a good machine that's capable of doing what you want it to do, even though it's not actually rendering at 4K. It's just upscaling the heck out of the 720p to 1080p, sometimes 1440p image. It's like, it's upscaling. That's all it's doing. It's not rendering at 4K. You're not getting anywhere close to 4K, and your machine is nowhere near powerful enough to do 4K. Most machines are not powerful enough to do 4K 60. Now, when you have higher end graphics cards, your 3090s up, through 4090s, up to 4090 and 5090, you have all those graphics cards. Yeah, 4K is a lot more doable. But even then, especially with Unreal Engine 5, it just ends up being even worse optimized, and it's all nonsense. And I think that people just need to take a breath, take a step back, and realize what they're actually getting. You're not going to get more for your money than you think you're getting. Now, it may be a great value to you, and that's wonderful. You like playing on consoles? By all means, keep doing it. Keep buying consoles, regardless of the fact that they're in some ways kind of ripping you off, but at the same time, I get it. It's simple. It's simple. You can just upgrade whenever they upgrade for you. You don't feel like you have to upgrade more often than that, whereas PC gamers supposedly have to upgrade all the time every time a new graphics card comes out, which is not true at all, by the way. I haven't upgraded my graphics card in 6 years. And I still have
What blasphemy?
I still have a more powerful PC by a large margin than what you get with your top end console right now. But yeah. Oh, I kind of lost my train of thought in terms of where I was going with this, but yeah, TLDL, the PS6, while it is undoubtedly being worked on right now, is not going to be powerful. It's going to be more powerful than the PS5 and the PS5 Pro, without question, but it's not going to be using the latest tech. It might be using little bits and pieces, but it's not going to be using the latest and greatest. It just never will be. They will not put that kind of money into it because they will have to charge you a whole lot more if they do that. And they're not going to do that because they want it to be reasonably affordable. Now, the PS6 will definitely launch at $700, maybe more. That's just the way it's going to go, like it or not, especially because enough people bought the PS5 Pro to where they're like, okay, yep, we can get away with this. They'll spend the money, and then they'll do a Pro model that'll be $850 probably, including the disk drive, if they still have a disk drive by that point. But anyway, I've talked enough. Go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, I definitely largely agree with everything you said. This is definitely much more than they're making it out to be. Now, I will throw them a bone and say I could possibly see the PS5 and I guess whatever Xbox console comes out as well, possibly having the 3D cache because of the fact that when the PS5 and Xbox Series launched, that technology wasn't available at the time, and only I think probably about a year or so later with after AMD put out the Ryzen 5 5000 series CPUs, then they started to have X3D, and that's what the first time they launched it. And then since then, there was only one CPU that had it, but then they, with the 7000 CPUs, they had I think 3 or 4 different X3D CPUs, and then I don't think they have any right now since the 9000 series just launched, but I think it's pretty reasonable to think that X3D is going to be coming out within a year or so. So while it might not be, say, like the latest version of X3D, I think it could be possible that X3D could make it into the PS6, even if it is, say, an older version of X3D. But for everything else, though, yeah, I definitely agree that it's definitely pretty far-fetched. But I do think it's funny, though, sitting how PS fanboys were saying, oh, the PS5 Pro is going to blow everything off the water. It's going to make your PCs look like trash. And they're getting hyped up for the PS6 because I guess the PS5 Pro didn't deliver on those promises. And so it's just going to be a cycle that continues. And I mean, considering the fact that, it could be the same thing with the PS5 when that launches and they say, whoa, we're getting 4K 60. And, our box says it has 8K on it. That means it's better. It's got 8K, which means every game has 8K. And that's not just it displays out to 8K or possible to display out to 8K. And we're probably going to do that other thing again where people say, like, yeah, we've got Returnal and it looks great and stuff. And then give it like a year or so, they're begging for a pro version. And just like, well, what happened to that PS6, spectacular graphics, dazzling resolution that you were boasting that was going to have? So yeah, I do agree that this is definitely possibly much larger than they think it is, but it could be possible that they do have the 3D the V3D in the CPU. I think it's possible. I'm not saying it will happen, but that's something I find at least somewhat plausible because AMD has been doing this at least twice already through 2 generations. So
right.
It's possible.
Yeah, and I could definitely agree with that. I mean, my main point was more just that it's not going to be the latest and greatest. Now, having the technology, like the earlier versions of the technology, yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. That will most likely happen, but going to the latest and the greatest and somehow surpassing PCs that cost significantly more, it's just like, it just doesn't work that way, no matter how much you want it to. And you need to just be okay with that. But people don't understand how any of this works. And like, I get it. I mean, I still don't even fully understand how all of this works. It wasn't until fairly recently that I even fully realized that the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, most games are still not rendering at 4K. Now, there are a handful of games that do, but the majority of them are rendering 1080p or lower, and then they use upscaling. And the upscaling doesn't really require power. I mean, I saw a video not long ago of, I think it was probably a PC that was still using a GTX 1080 Ti, and they were able to upscale to 8K and still get decent frame rates. And it's like, well, I mean, if a card that's that old can do 8K, technically, I mean, 8K in the same way that the PlayStation could do 8K, then okay. But it's like, no PC is rendering a game at 8K. It just is not happening, period. Not a chance. Maybe if it was like an old game, like an N64 game that got ported over, yeah, I could see that being the case. But, for like actual modern games, never. Well, I shouldn't say never. It's going to be a long time before we're able to render at 8K. And that's when it will get to the point that we have like probably TV screens that go up to like 15K or something. I don't know, 16K. Yeah. At which point, and even then it might not, because we're at the point where 4K screens are abundant. Most people have 4K TVs, excluding me for sure. But none of the games, at least on the console side, are actually rendering at 4K there, or at least the vast majority of them are not rendering at 4K. And yeah, people need to temper their expectations a lot more. And if they had even just a little bit of understanding of how upscaling works, they would realize that it's not nearly as impressive as they think it is. And their consoles are not as powerful as they think they are. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just enjoy your games. It's like, you want to play 4K? By all means, go ahead. If I had a 4K monitor, I would be able to actually demonstrate how the upscaling works. I don't have any 4K screens, so I can't demonstrate it. But it's like, yeah, it's a pretty simple setting you can just do in the graphics card. It's not, I mean, it's like the game itself, you have it set rendering at a specific resolution, and then you can go into the graphics card and have it set so that it automatically upscales that to whatever size screen you have, and whatever resolution you have. And I mean, that's kind of a simplified way of explaining how it works. And there's different kinds of upscaling you can use, but the reality is that that's all these consoles are doing with the vast majority of games, is they're just upscaling. So, which is why the Switch will probably be able to do 4K, is because, or Switch 2 will be able to do 4K, is because it's just upscaling. And otherwise, there's not a chance that it would ever be able to do 4K because, or at least, not the Switch 2, because it's just, you have to have a lot more power than what they can put into a handheld device. At least a handheld device that's going to be as cheap as the Switch 2 will probably be. So, yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
No, sir.
Well, speaking of the Switch 2, of course, last week we had that reveal of the Switch 2, and there have been some more rumors about potential ports that are coming over to the system, and which ports those are ranges quite a bit. Some of them we had talked about previously, long before we actually saw the Switch 2, and there have been some new reports that have said there are games like, not just Elden Ring, which we already knew about, but also, well, not just Elden Ring, not just Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth that we had already talked about last week, but also Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, Grand Theft Auto 6, and Diablo 4. And I definitely have plenty of thoughts on how much I believe these rumors, but I certainly would like to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Now, I'll be honest. Part of this, I was waiting to see what would happen, because some of the games, namely Metal Gear Delta, and I believe like stuff which we also mentioned before, Halo, Master Chief Collection, Microsoft Flight Simulator, coming to Switch 2, were reported by Nate the Hate. Mm-hmm. And he of course mentioned that we were gonna get Switch 2 announcement reveal last week. Mm-hmm. And I was really waiting to see what would happen, because I thought, I mean, of course things could change, and depending on the different sources he had, some stuff might be more credible than others. But if the Switch 2 was revealed last week, which it was, then I think there's a fair chance this is happening. And I really think that, in light of what happened, Metal Gear Delta could be coming. Because the Switch 2, which, while we do not have these, full specs and everything, based on what we have from the leaks and rumors, it is a capable device. So it should be able to play Metal Gear Solid Delta. And so I think that it definitely could be coming. And the same would also apply to Diablo 4, and also Grand Theft. Well, I'll say Grand Theft Auto 6. I'm going to add a small caveat to that, though, because while the Switch 2 would be a more capable device, I don't know. Of course, we haven't really seen much of GTA 6. Mm-hmm. Not certain how it would perform, but with NVIDIA and possibly using DLSS, then it probably would be, might be running the game at 30 frames per second. Could possibly get something a little more, but it could be getting something pretty reasonable for what it is. But I think, though, as a whole, I do see this as a possibility. I mean, considering the fact that last gen, the Nintendo Switch got games that people would not think it would be receiving, like Doom and Doom Eternal. No one would say those games would never run on a Switch, and I mean, they got them to run. Whether you think it ran well is debatable, but they got the game ported. They got those games ported over, and so I think that having a stronger device like the Switch 2 is definitely reasonable. And I mean, I think that Nintendo and the Switch have I think Nintendo's really done a good job at uh, marketing the Switch well enough that devs would want to port games over to their handheld. And if the Switch 2 is going to be a more powerful device or more powerful version of the original Switch, then devs would definitely say, yeah, we don't mind putting our games over here because there's something here. So I do think that it is possible that GTA 6 and uh, Delta and Diablo 4 could come over. It's just something that, of course, we would have to wait and see. And of course, with because I don't think there is a concrete date yet for Metal Gear Solid. It has there been a set date yet?
Nothing yet.
Okay, so because of that, I think it's definitely possible. And with the Switch to Direct coming in April, then of course I really believe we'll actually have a good. I think we'll definitely know most, if not all, of the games that are coming out this year, and I believe that is when these games will actually be announced. Of course, along with any other titles that come out this year. But I'm pretty confident this is all true. But that is pretty much everything I have to say in summary.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing that, like, regarding Grand Theft Auto 6, because I think that one's the hardest to believe. The one thing that occurred to me as I thought about it is that Rockstar is really good at optimizing their games. The fact that Red Dead Redemption 2 runs as well as it does on the Steam Deck, I mean, that's an impressive game. It's a really good PC port. I think that they could get Grand Theft Auto 6 running on the Switch 2. And if the rumor of the Switch 2 having a 256 gigs of storage is accurate, then storage wouldn't be an issue either. Even though I do expect the game is probably going to be, well, I guess I should say it won't be as much of an issue with storage, because I'm going to guess that GTA 6, unless they allow you to separate multiplayer and single player, will probably be about 200 gigs. It's gonna be a massive game. Granted, if they stick to lower resolution textures on the Switch 2, then it wouldn't be nearly as large. Because a lot of these games that have the larger file sizes in the high 100s and the 200s, it's because of the 4K textures. And if they leave those completely out of the Switch version, then it would definitely significantly reduce the file size, because 4K images are just huge amount. I mean, it's a huge amount of space that it takes up. So if they leave those out, they could save a lot of space. So there's that. Now, in terms of, and we had already talked about Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth last week. Based on what we've seen for the for how Remake ran on Steam Deck, I think, yeah, I absolutely believe that'll be a real thing. Rebirth seems like it runs decently on Steam Deck, and if the Switch 2 is relatively similar in power, plus utilizes DLSS, which of course is way better than FSR, I think that it could actually, I mean, it probably will run pretty similarly on the Switch 2 as how it runs on Steam Deck for that particular game. I think the one that has me in some ways having the most pause, apart from GTA 6, is Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. And the main reason I say that is because it's an Unreal Engine 5 game. So I do think that, yes, if they keep the resolution low enough, leave out the 4K textures, and utilize DLSS, they probably could get it running at 30 frames per second. But it would definitely be a downgraded version. So that one just has me kind of, I just need to see it. I know that when the earliest like leaks we had about the Switch 2 said that they were doing like that Matrix demo on the Switch 2 behind closed doors, and that was in Unreal Engine 5. So maybe it'll be reasonably doable. But of course, the difference with that is that was, I think that was primarily just like pre-rendered stuff as opposed to actually being playable, but I'm not sure. So, of course, with Elden Ring, I'd say that's pretty much guaranteed that that'll be on Switch 2 as a complete edition. And that one I'm really curious to see, because I'm pretty happy with how Elden Ring runs on the Steam Deck. And I'm really curious to see how it's going to run on the Switch 2 whenever that happens, because I believe that one's a very, very good possibility. And Diablo 4, I'd say that's guaranteed. That's going to be on the Switch 2. It runs really well on Steam Deck. I mean, you're even running the Battle.net version, which of course you have to do a separate launcher for. You get 60 frames per second on low settings. And the Switch 2, having a native version, because I've heard actually the Steam version runs better than the Battle.net version on the Steam Deck. Having the native version, they should be able to get at least a decent frame rate. I think they can at least do 30 frames per second. If they really sacrifice on the visuals more, similar to what they did with Diablo 3 on the Switch, they might be able to get 45 to 60, or at least like have an uncapped frame rate where it can do anywhere in that range rather than being a locked 60. But I don't know. Yeah, I think that I really think that these are probably all accurate, and I'm super curious how they're going to look and run on the Switch 2, if they actually do come.
Yeah, and I will say, again, we don't have any concrete evidence, but if the Switch 2 is roughly as powerful as the Steam Deck, while the graphics will be vastly different because Delta is going to have, better textures and, better lighting and stuff like that. At least as far as Unreal Engine 5 goes, the Switch 2 might be able to run it at 30, maybe 40 frames per second, just because of the fact that when I did play Palworld on my deck, it was getting up to 50 frames per second. Okay. Most of the time it was in like the higher 30s or low 40s, but it was able to run it at that frame rate. And that's also an Unreal Engine 5 game. Right. So while Metal Gear Solid Delta is going to be a more graphically impressive game, at least as far as the engine goes, at least, it can run it. It can run it. So if the Switch 2 is as powerful, if not maybe a little more powerful than a Steam Deck, and has DLSS, it could run it at a pretty stable frame rate. Yeah. So I think it could definitely be possible. Again, of course, it's the graphics that will be more intensive than Palworld's, but as far as the engine goes, it should be able to run it.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that game does have going for it, despite the fact that obviously it's going to look extremely good, especially with everything we've seen so far, is that the environments are small. It's very corridor-based in terms of the level layouts. There's only a few areas that are open-ish, and even those are not really open. Now, when adding more like foliage and all of that is definitely going to use a lot more system resources, but I could see them having a lot more pop in and then still having it work out well. So I don't know. I'm super curious about that one, especially because obviously I love Metal Gear Solid 3. I'm a huge fan of that game. I played through it 3 times in 2023, and I could easily see myself playing it again. And obviously whenever Delta comes out, assuming it's not a completely broken port on PC, I'll be playing it again for sure. But yeah, It's interesting times we live in right now when it comes to these games and this hardware and seeing what the Switch 2 is actually capable of. Obviously, a big thing, we just have to wait for that April presentation and see what they show. I imagine there's going to be just a ton of game announcements. They'll probably do a little more actual explanations of what the Switch 2 can do, especially like the mouse thing. I'm super curious about because it's obvious that that's something that they showed in the trailer. We just don't know exactly how that's going to work. Quick side note on that, though. One of the videos that I came across, I didn't get a chance to watch it, but it was just, a theory from someone based on the mouse thing, is the idea of using the mouse controls for Metroid Prime 4, which would make aiming amazing. Well, assuming that the thing is easy enough to hold. I mean, those Joy-Cons, the new Joy-Cons are definitely bigger than the old ones, but for big hands, it still might be a challenge unless they have some kind of shell that you can attach to it that would make it easier to grip. But I would happily play a Metroid game with a mouse. That would be fantastic for aiming. So, but yeah, I think that's about all I have on thoughts for that. Do you have any others?
No, sir.
All right. So we're getting close to the end here. Just talk about... I guess well... I guess we'll just cover one last topic tonight. We won't worry about the... Okay, let me back up. So, very briefly, we just mention... since it will be confirmed one way or another before the podcast even releases, supposedly Doom the Dark Ages has a leaked release date of May 15th. So we'll see when we actually watch the presentation tomorrow from Xbox whether or not that's the case, because that is one of the games they're focusing on. I would say it's very likely. Do you have any brief thoughts about that one?
Nah, I just agree. I think it's definitely likely that it will be that's the date.
Yeah, I need to finish replaying Doom 2016 and probably play through Eternal, including all the DLC. Play through Eternal again and then play through all the DLC for the first time before playing Doom the Dark Ages, because I definitely want to play it, but I really want to replay those games and enjoy all the gloriousness of playing on PC and Steam Deck, because they perform so much better there than they do on the Switch, where I played both games originally. But yeah. But our last topic for tonight is that the games industry, according to, let's see, what was it? Let me find the actual terminology that they used. Where was it? According to some game industry analyst, is that there is hope in the games industry that Grand Theft Auto 6 could cost up to $100 so that other companies could raise their default prices as well. And I'm going to let you talk about this, of course, but first I'm going to say this sounds real, completely real, and not just the industry analyst is saying this and nobody else agrees with it. I think that they absolutely want the game to cost $100. But why don't you give me your thoughts on this train wreck of a potential idea?
Yeah, I agree that this is definitely something that they will want to see. And one thing that I haven't seen, but I haven't been able to confirm or at least double check, but I really feel like this is the case, is this analyst is someone who is looking at it from a stock perspective, stock market analyst. So I really think that a lot of this, and I think that this stuff is something the industry wants to do as well, is something not focused on, how it's not something that's focused on our end. Let me say that. And to have hope that GTA 6 will be $100 and that the market will follow, it's such an it, it, it's it's an absurd take to have. It's something that you don't even begin to think about. I mean, the fact that only a few years ago games were ridiculously, I mean, they still are, but they're being charged at $70, and now you want to charge them at $100. That's ridiculous. And the fact that people say, "Oh, well, if you pay more, all these things will happen. They'll be complete games." And I not for 1 second will I believe that them charging $100 for the game means that there won't be any microtransactions. There won't be any sort of content that will be added in the form of paid DLC. That we won't have any sort of major bugs, game-breaking bugs in the game. Don't Not for 1 second do I believe that any of this will be cut out, because I believe that is something that's gonna happen. You're gonna have the same quality, possibly even worse, and you're gonna be paying more. And people say, "Oh, but inflation, it costs more." Yeah, well, at the same time, back in, people want to point out in 1990 whatever and say that game cartridges cost so much. Well, yeah, they were on cartridges. It was hard to produce them. It wasn't the same as putting them on a disc. Additionally, there were fewer gamers then, as opposed to now, when there are more people who are gaming, which means there are more people buying the games. And additionally, for one other thing, which I think, which I've heard before, and it's something that does make sense. How are it with games more so being digital than they have before? How are games not getting cheaper then? I mean, since manufacturing and distribution is more expensive than selling them digitally, then the digital games should at least be cheaper than the physical games. So I think that these arguments for saying that inflation and stuff do not make a lot of sense. And going back to earlier, when we were talking about PlayStation, the biggest thing that you and I both said was the fact that the budgets for these games are way out of proportion. They're way higher than they need to be. And so if you feel like you need to charge $100 to make to make a profit on these games, then obviously you're spending way too much on the game to begin with. If you can't get a game to sell at $60, and if this actually does happen and they do charge $100, I hope it blows up in their faces, because they really need to get a reality check that this is not acceptable. And we should. And granted, there are gamers out there, whether they're just GTA fanboys or just gamers who just consume freely without using any sort of critical thinking whatsoever, who just say, "Oh, $100 isn't all that much, you're just a brokey. You just can't afford to play a game. These are luxury hobbies and stuff." And it's like, you realize that you're enabling them, and you're going to make this a more common thing by supporting this. So there will be people who, if this happens, they will buy into it. But I really hope that the majority actually puts on their thinking caps and remembers the fact that $70 price tags did not equate better quality products. And so because of it, they say $100 will not necessarily equal higher quality products. I mean, it's ridiculous. And with very few exceptions, and I mean very few exceptions, like 1 in 1,000, of course, that name one being, Metroid, I will not spend $60 on a game. At most I will spend $40 on a single game. That's me pushing it, because I guess you could consider me a bit of a cheapskate when it comes to gaming. Not that I don't, I feel like I shouldn't pay for games. I will pay for a game, but at the same time, I don't want to spend too much money on something. So I will wait for a good sale before I buy something, because my money is much more finite than a AAA studio's money. So, and also, if I'm going to spend money on something, I want to make sure that I'm actually going to enjoy it. So I do want to make sure that it's worth my investment in that sense. But so I'm not going to spend $70. I'm going to spend $100 on a game. If I'm going to spend that much, the only reason it's going to be that much is because I'm buying some sort of collector's edition or special edition. I feel like in those cases, spending $100 plus is, is reasonable because you are getting something that comes with it. You're going to be getting, or at least it used to be, you get some sort of like physical stuff, like especially you get like the CD, you might get a small little statue, something like that. I did that with Zelda Breath of the Wild, so it's understandable if you do that. But if only the core game itself is $100, that is ridiculous. And any company that does that should be ashamed of themselves for doing that, because they clearly were not using enough forward thinking to see that, hey, maybe it might not be a good idea because gamers aren't going to want to buy this. They might not want to shell out that much money, or at least we can't convince enough gamers to put up that much money. And then eventually we're going to see, oh, sales weren't as great as we expected. And of course, because of that, then they say, oh, well, I guess gamers don't want so-and-so. And when it's like, no, we wanted this game, but at the same time, we didn't want to spend this much money for this game. And then they're going to, just make up some sort of excuses and say, oh, well, this flops because X, Y, and Z, when it's like, no, the answer was right there. And you only hoped that these games would cost $100, and yeah, I'm just gonna essentially be looping on myself. So I think this is ridiculous. It could happen, but I really hope that if it does happen, this gets nipped in the bud right away, and that it's not something that is tolerated, because this is ridiculous. And considering the fact that, how do you go, while I disliked it, how do you jump from 70 to 100? That's a huge jump to make, and I highly doubt we're going to have some sort of huge jump in quality to reflect that price change whatsoever. But that's all I'm going to say there.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. One thing I always find funny is that the same people who will say, oh, you're brokies because you don't want to spend this much money on the game, are the same people who say that PC gaming is too expensive. It's like, we spend our money up front to build our hardware, and you don't even necessarily have to spend as much money. You can build a decent PC, at least to start off, that's more powerful than PS5 Pro and less expensive, or around the same price. Maybe a little bit more, but you're spending a little bit more on the front end, and then you spend a lot less on the back end, especially in terms of games, because there are so many more games, and there's frequent sales, and there's free games, actual free games, not ones that are quote unquote free while you're subscribed to their service. And so it's just, I find that part funny. But in terms of this idea of doing $100 for Grand Theft Auto 6, I think there is a high likelihood that the $100 would be an early access version. I'd say that's basically guaranteed. They're going to do a $100 version that has early access attached to it. This is one developer where I would say I think there is a very strong possibility that the game will be very polished at launch, because Rockstar usually, with the exception of like the Grand Theft Auto trilogy that they made a few years ago, the remasters of that, with the exception of that, their games come out very polished right at launch. And so I think that it's very likely, especially with how long it's taken for them to make Grand Theft Auto 6, that's going to be very polished at launch, and that for people who really love these kinds of games, it'll probably be worth their money. However, that's only if you're buying the premium version, like you were saying. If it's a premium version that also includes early access, I could see people spending that $100, no questions asked. But for the base version, if they were charging $100, I'm not convinced that they would do that. I do think there is a possibility they could bump it up to $80 for the base version at launch. And I can definitely think of plenty of people who would be willing to spend that kind of money. I think $100 would be going too far for a base version. And I understand the reasons why developers and analysts and people who are investors and all that would love it if they went up to $100 at launch, because we know GTA 6 is going to be a huge seller, and it's probably going to be at the top of the sales charts for the next 10 years, or, in the top 10 or whatever for the next 10 years. But I also think that a lot of people are going to reject that price because it's just too much. Especially in this economy, it's just like $100 is just too much for a single game if you're not getting anything extra from it. And I go back and forth on how I feel about the early access trend that we've had. Because sometimes it can be nice for people who want to be able to play a little bit early, but at the same time, we also really like take a step back and think about it. It's like, well, technically that's really the real release date, and they're just making everybody else who's not paying as much wait longer for the grand opening instead of the soft opening or whatever. And I've bought a few games to get early access. Bought a few games early. I did that with Starfield, and I did it with Ghost Runner 2. Although Ghost Runner 2, I definitely have zero regrets buying early because, it's a phenomenal game. But, and I think I also did it with Diablo 4, so I could get into the beta and then also have early access, which was kind of like mixed from that standpoint, even though I do enjoy the game. But probably my only real regret on that front would just be because of the fact that I didn't play it consistently as long and still slowly working my way through it. But anyway, this idea of going up to $100, I hate the idea. And I know that if games start charging $100, then especially for a base version, I'm just going to say no. I will not buy that game at $100. I will wait for a sale if I really want to play it. Because there are not many games that could... I don't think there's any game that could convince me to spend $100 at launch if it wasn't with some significant benefit that came out of it, and if it wasn't from like a developer that I just really trust, I have faith in what they're going to be able to put out. And I know that it's going to be something that is worth that money to me. There are just not many games like that. And as it is, even then, I would try not to spend that much. I think with like Starfield, Diablo I couldn't get a discount on, but Starfield I was able to get a 20% off discount because I went through Green Man Gaming. So at least there was that, and I did still get a lot of hours out of it, even though I haven't really played it in quite a while and don't know when I'm going to get back to it. But Grand Theft Auto, of course, I have zero interest in. I'm not buying this game at all. I just don't want to play it. I don't really know what else to say. I don't like the idea. I could see it happening, but I don't think they're going to do $100 for the base version. I do think there will be a $100 edition, however. And I can see them potentially bumping it up to $80 for this release and trying to set that new standard, which probably will be followed by most companies. And I think Nintendo will be the only one that might hold off initially because they're probably going to be charging $70 for their games this gen, would be my guess. But yeah.
Nothing more from me.
All right. Well, let's get into our recommendations and dissuasions. So start us off.
All right. So I've got several recommendations. My first one is going to be make manual saves in Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's something I've been doing, and it has helped me out several times because I accidentally wanted to go back and loop back and double check some areas to explore, whereas the game automatically put me forward and I had to keep going. Mm-hmm. So being able to manually go back rather than the auto save mess me up has been great. So definitely if you want to, if you care about exploration and not accidentally triggering something, make manual saves because they can definitely help you out. Next thing I'll say is to grab Toaga Among Shadows on Steam for free. It's a game that I saw earlier today was being delisted from Steam, so they're setting it out for free now, so you can go ahead and pick that up. And then the last thing I'm going to recommend is the Gundam Wing OST. I was listening to it while I was working on my Gundam models, and it's a great soundtrack. It has some good rock, has some good jazz, has some good electronic music. It's a nice good blend of different genres, so definitely recommend it. It's definitely very solid.
That's a good recommendation. Yeah, I still remember various songs from Gundam Wing, and it's been probably 25 years since I last really watched it heavily. I guess I did watch it I think shortly after we got married. I bought the DVDs, which unfortunately were probably counterfeit, and watched through at least a good chunk of the series. I was trying to get my wife into it, and she just wasn't really getting into it, and I can't remember if I ever finished watching it after that, but yeah. And there was recently a video I watched. I think it was kind of an old video, but I'm sure if you're familiar with Song Wong Cho, he does lots of impersonations and little skits and stuff. He also does a lot of voice acting. He's excellent. He's really talented and really funny guy. And he did one where he was reenacting the scene where Hiro tells what's her face? What's the girl's name?
Relena,
yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. Tells her that he's going to kill her, and he reenacts both parts. and part of that he plays the the music from the show, and just bringing back memories from that. Da 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 da. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, good stuff. All right, my recommendations. First of all, I'm going to recommend Zelda Ocarina of Time. Any form you can get to play that game, whether it's playing the original version on Nintendo 64, or playing the GameCube disc version, or playing the Wii U version, or the Wii version, or playing the 3DS version, or playing the PC version. Any of those, and there's also the Nintendo Switch Online version, but any of those versions, just find a version, play that game if you haven't played it before. It's a great game. It still holds up really well. Even if the lower frame rate is not ideal, it's still a great game. And of course, obviously, if you play the PC version, then the frame rate's not going to be an issue, because you can crank it up. It goes up to a maximum of 360 frames per second, which obviously I capped it at 240 because I don't have a monitor that goes any higher than that. So yeah, but yes, play that game if you have not played it before. Not very long, and it's fantastic. I'm also going to recommend a hot sauce that I had come across. I'd seen it for multiple years now, and I just recently grabbed a bottle of it because they had a big, I think it's a 32-ounce bottle or something, and it was under $2. And I grabbed it, tried it for the first time. Valentina's hot sauce. And it's really good. It's not very spicy. It's less spicy than Tapatio, but it's thicker, a little more tomatoey, and it's got great flavor. So highly recommend that. And the last thing I want to recommend is the TV show, which ended a number of years ago, but it was a great series called White Collar. It was a USA show, basically about a con man / art thief. I guess maybe not as much a con man, more like an art thief kind of guy who, a white collar criminal who gets caught and gets the opportunity to serve out his sentence working for the white collar division of the FBI as a consultant, basically confidential informant, and in helping solve crimes. It did 6 seasons, and we're almost done rewatching it. We haven't rewatched it. I think the last time we finished going through it was when it was originally on TV, and it's been off the TV for a long time. So, but yeah, it's a great series, well worth checking out. And I'm not sure where you can watch it exactly, other than getting physical versions of the discs. Annoyingly, they did the first season on Blu-ray when it came out. They did Blu-ray and DVD, and then every season after that was just DVD. Just like, why do you do that?
What?
Why? And they're not the only ones who've done that. I think Hawaii Five-0 was another one that we had. I mean, we don't have the whole series, but like we had watched through, and like the first 3 seasons were all Blu-ray and DVD, and then after that they only did DVDs. And just like, why? Why do you do this to me? I hate it when they do this kind of crap. But
Yeah,
Where-
I'll definitely check out that because I remember seeing at least the title a long time ago on like the physical TV guide booklets, and I mean I was young though, so I didn't know what it was.
we were like 5.
But yeah, I'll definitely check that out since it definitely sounds interesting. It definitely was. It's definitely a different premise than I would have ever expected. So yeah, thank you for that.
For sure. That's all I got for recommendations.
Okay.
All right, dissuasions.
All right. So my dissuasions. First one's going to be don't stream games unless your device is wired / your internet is good enough, because streaming the way I was to my Steam Deck was not a pleasant experience. If my PC was hooked up via Ethernet, it wouldn't be a problem, but just through Wi-Fi with both devices was not, I think, was not a good experience. So definitely don't do that. And then my other dissuasion is don't use classic controls in FF7 Remake. Unless you feel like you absolutely need to use it and that it definitely helps you out a whole lot, then go ahead, I guess. But I think that in general, just don't use it because it's just not good enough. And more often than not, I think it's going to be a detriment than a help.
Agreed. Wholeheartedly on both of those. All right, and my dissuasion is a food-related dissuasion. I decided to let me back up a little bit. I had some leftover buffalo chicken from the last time I made buffalo chicken mac and cheese, which my recipe is on my YouTube channel, Not Authentic But Delicious. But I had some leftover buffalo chicken, and I decided, okay, I'm going to put this in a breakfast burrito. It's like, it should be good. And I decided to put various other things in it. I had some homemade queso, recipe also on my channel. Homemade bacon, recipe also on my channel. And did you freeze again? No, you're still there. Okay, never mind. And I put all those things in there, and I still had a little bit of the crumbled blue cheese left. And I thought, well, it might be okay to mix this in because, blue cheese goes well with the buffalo chicken. But that competing flavor, the blue cheese has a very strong flavor, and that competes so much with all the other flavors that I basically just couldn't taste all the other flavors, and it ruined it. So my dissuasion specifically is when you're making a breakfast burrito, don't have 2 very strong competing flavors or one competing flavor that's going to overpower everything else in there. Keep them separated, or reduce the amount of stuff you have and just go with the things that go well together, and don't try to mix all those things together because it just makes it so you can't taste it all, and that makes it less enjoyable. So
Yeah, that's very good to keep in mind.
all right, that's everything I have. Where can people find you?
They can find me on my channel. I am Xeracon. That's IAMXERACON. So youtube.com/@IamXeracon. No new content this week. We'll see what happens. I don't have any plans for anything, but of course, apart from what I mentioned last week. But we'll see when that happens. But yeah.
All right. Well, you can find me on my YouTube gaming channel at TheFrozenGamer87. I haven't put anything up new this past week. However, I do have my Persona 5 Strikers comparison between the Steam Deck OLED and the Switch OLED that is going up on Monday, the 27th of January. So that definitely check that out. I will say in advance, in terms of the audio for the Switch, it is not as good as I wanted it to be. unfortunately, because there was some interference with the external recorder I used for recording the audio, because I was doing direct audio recording to the recorder. Worked great for the Steam Deck, but for the Switch, it was weird. And so in order to correct that, I had to do quite a bit of audio filtration, and ultimately the audio was nowhere near where I would like it to be because it's not as clean as it should be. But there's no kid noises in the background, at least. So it's I did make notes for all that and pointed out that this is not an accurate representation of how the Switch's audio sounds, but everything else is an accurate representation. So it's a cool comparison, and it's great that the game, despite being listed as unsupported for the Steam Deck, actually runs great by simply using Proton GE. So there's that. Then I have my cooking channel, Not Authentic But Delicious. That's YouTube at NABD Cooking. No new recipes have gone up yet. I have a few potential ones in the works, but I haven't filmed anything. It's just been kind of a busy couple weeks, so I'm not sure when the next one's going to be going up. It might potentially be a couple weeks. I think I know which recipe I want to do next, which would be my pork loin pastrami. But I need to make sure I have all the necessary spices for that, because I know I'm missing a couple I'm out of a couple that I'm going to need for the recipe, and so I need to retrack down the recipe, and then, or for the actual for the spice blend that I need for the brine, and then I can get that filming started on that area. Then we have, of course, the YouTube channel for the podcast. So if you're listening to the audio only version of the podcast, which comes out every Friday, 12 a.m. Central Time, the video version goes up on our YouTube channel at the Orange Box Podcast. And that has, in addition to having all the normal stuff that you have in the audio only version, you also get to see our beautiful faces if you so desire, as well as clips from games we've been playing, and also trailers and stuff of things that we're talking about. So it's a bit more dynamic than what you get just from the audio only version, but obviously it's completely a personal preference thing. But going back to the audio only version, that goes up on every major podcast platform. So that includes YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, probably Stitcher. I honestly can't remember what all the different ones are, but it goes out to all these different feeds. So you can check that out if you just want the audio only version. On top of that, we have a new channel that I have not started putting the clips up yet, but at the Orange Box Pod Clips, that is where we're going to be putting up the segments of the podcast each week. And I'll be working on getting the first set of clips from last week's episode up this weekend. Probably just put them all out at once, and then also get all the clips from this week's episode up to start publishing as well. So that'll be an opportunity if you don't want to listen to the full podcast all the time and you just want to listen to the different segments. You can do it through that. Let's see here. I think there was something else, but I can't remember what it was, so it probably wasn't that important. Gosh, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, that's probably everything. Oh, yes. If you want to contact us, you can email us, theorangeboxpodcast@gmail.com. You can comment on the video version. You can send us a tweet or X. I don't know what you call it on X, but you can send us something at the Orange Box Pod, and we'll get back to you and or read your questions or comments on the show, depending on what it is. But that should be everything. Any final thoughts?
No, sir.
Well, I am the Frozen Gamer 87. That is I am Zaracon. We are the Orange Box Podcast. And until next time, don't spend $100 on a standard edition video game. Orange Box Podcast out.